In 2014, I found out I was getting divorced about February, March of that year. And it just so happened I had my years of education in too. So instead of staying on and working 2 or 3 more years, I decided to retire. So I tell people that I got divorced, quit my job, and then almost a year later, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. That's not something, and unfortunately, I'm sure many of you all have been told something like that yourself, or you certainly know someone who has been told that. And it gets your attention real quick. You know, and I started a lawn care business, and I was mowing near the school. And I was on a steep bank, and I know parents were driving by with their young children, taking them to school and from school. And I happened to think one day, mothers in their cars are probably telling their children right now, if you don't do better in school, you're going to end up like that poor old guy over there mowing. And I say that because I look completely different today than when I'm mowing, but I'm the same person. And that was the neat thing about hiking the Appalachian Trail. We all look like homeless people. In fact, somebody said you pay a lot of money to look like that. On the Appalachian Trail, when you're meeting, and I started in Maine, I met this guy and this lady, and he had actually started the year before. This is in late July. So he really looked like he had been in the woods a long time. And so we're walking, and because you're on a footpath about a foot wide, you usually stop and talk to each other. So we talked, and I'll never forget his beard. He had a pack on his chest, and it had an American flag, and I asked him, "Were you a veteran?" And he said, "No. I just love this country." So we talked, and then it came time for us to head in the opposite directions. And he stopped and said, "Working class." And I thought, okay, how am I going to respond to that? Because I had a friend who would always give me a hard time about he was working class and I was white collar. And I thought for a second, well, now I grew up on a dairy farm and I'm cutting grass now, so I know. Working class. He said, "No, that's my trail name." And the girl with him was lost and found. Well, I could relate to that too because I had just lost my toilet paper the day before. And I said, "My trail name is Survivor." And that was given to me about 100 miles out by a guy who heard my story. Now, I always start my speech with this, and this was posted by a guy that had hiked the trail. And I laugh and I tell people that I've opened up messages in First Baptist churches from the book of Marley. Read that for just a second and think about what it means. You say you love rain, but you use an umbrella to walk under it. You say you love sun, but you seek shelter when it is shining. You say you love wind, but when it comes, you close your windows. So that's why I'm scared when you say you love me. I'm going to tell you what that means to me in just a second. But when I received an invitation to come here to speak, I thought, you know what? I need to visit the children's home. So I took a day and I visited the children's home. And again, I've been in public education for 32 years, so I put my principal's hat on. Now, when somebody walked into my building, I had a certain set of expectations of what I wanted that person's experience to be. And I'll tell you, when I walked into the office up there, my expectations were met and exceeded. I was greeted by the most friendly receptionist I could have imagined, with a great smile and a hello. I felt welcome immediately. And then just moments later, I got the full history of the children's home. And then I spent hours there walking around, seeing students, seeing staff members, and I left there knowing these people really care about and they're passionate about what they are doing. And that was important to me. I felt really good about that. And I tell people, I had a principal tell me one time, school, people who make decisions about school worked for them. See, school doesn't necessarily work for all of our students. And I told them before I left there, you have things going on here that would benefit any student anywhere. So I just wanted to say that about my experience having visited, and I've heard stories since my visit. But it impressed me. Now this gets into my story a little bit. See, I read this and I think about contradictions. This is full of contradictions, isn't it? For me, I thought I was a good friend. When I was diagnosed with colon cancer, I had surgery on August the 14th. On August the 15th, that's my logo, the blue stars for colon cancer and the lavender ribbon is for all cancer. On August the 15th, Randy Davis, the second one from the left, was at the foot of my bed with his wife. Now I'm 56 and he's 55, I guess, at the time. Randy was diagnosed with prostate cancer when he was 50. We played pee-wee football together. We played high school basketball together. We frog gigged together. We double dated together. We roomed together at Tennessee Wesleyan. We worked together. But you know how many times I had been to visit him when he was in the hospital? Not one time. So I was laying there in that bed thinking, I'm not a very good friend. And I've tried to think a lot about that. One of the questions my assistant principal and I asked, how are we going to be remembered? See, I don't have children, so I've wondered, what is my legacy going to be? How am I going to be remembered? I hope I'm remembered as a better friend than what I was then. People ask, how many pairs of shoes did you wear? 6. Now going back, my pastor is on the left. Coach Watson, who got me into education, and then myself, all 4 of us have had some form of cancer or another. If you were to walk from here to California, or to Los Angeles, that's about the distance of the Appalachian Trail, 2,189.1 miles. That doesn't count hiking to the shelters. This is my first day. I went backwards. I started in Maine and went south. This is how you find your way. A tube of 6-inch white blaze. I like this picture because you can see 4 blazes. This is in the 100-mile wilderness. Now I'm going to tell you, and after we've just eaten, and I know you've been debating whether you're going to have a brownie or a chocolate cookie, I'm going to tell you about a 5 million step diet plan. It's really easy to follow. But the guy on the left, that's out of the box. He was a cordon bleu trained chef working for Ruth Chris. This is at the beginning of his hike. That's halfway. Now, I started out at 237 pounds and ended up down at 191. I think I was about dehydrated though, but he actually lost a person. Now this, when you think about the trail being a walk in the woods, this is part of the trail. I told Brian about this earlier. And so you come to the top of that, and you've got to figure out, they say it's a world's longest problem-solving course. And there were times you would get to a place and you would think, how am I going to do this? So that's trail. I had gone a little over 200 miles. Now that was one of my first depressing thoughts. I had just gone from Maine into New Hampshire. And I thought, I've gone 200 miles. And then I thought, I still have 2,000 to go. And so I did some quick math and I thought, I've gone 10% of the way and I'm celebrating. So you couldn't think about the entire length of the trail. You literally had to break it down into the next 3 or 4 days. That's the only wildlife I saw. The only bear I saw was coming through the zoo at Fort Montgomery, New York. That's the lowest point along the trail, maybe for more reasons than one, but literally you walk, you cross the bridge over I don't remember, the Hudson or whatever, and then you walk through a zoo. And at the lowest elevation along the trail, that's where the bear cage is. And that's the only bear I saw. This is a hostel, and one of the things I wanted to do on my hike was to kind of get out of my comfort zone. Now, if I were going to go on a conference trip in education, guys always get a private room. So I thought, I'm going to step outside my comfort zone a little bit. And so they tell you, go upstairs in what used to be the hayloft and find a bed without anything on it. So right here, this is the bed I selected. So this is an example of a hostel. And so you just stay in there with multiple others. You know, you're alike. So I made the comment, I felt like I had gone and stayed all night with the Darlings after my first visit in the hostel. So one of my friends took the picture of the Darlings, and you can see I blend right in, but if you don't recognize, this is me. That's not Rafe Hollister or one of the other characters. They took Barney out and put me in. Now this is again another one of the trail shots, and you can see the white blaze, and you can see the white blaze right here. That's trail. This is one of my favorite pictures. There in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. I was still in New Hampshire this time I was on my trail. Trail pictures. When I was diagnosed, I thought, I can't just hike the Appalachian Trail. I need to do something and not just be about me. See, I thought when I hiked the trail that when I got through, this would be something I could say, this is what I accomplished. Because I had been blessed through my life as East Tennessee Principal of the Year, Tennessee Coach of the Year, but I was always quick to point out I was able to accomplish those things because of other people. So I thought when I hike 2,000 miles, I'm going to be able to say, I did this myself. So what I started doing, and I started out with about 5 people, I decided to hike in honor and memory of other people who had cancer or other diseases or other challenges. I was on the trail 158 days, and I ended up hiking in honor and memory of over 160 people. I kept getting all of these requests. And so when I would get to town, I would spend my time putting together a post about that person. And I would say, I can't take any more, and then I'd get 5 more. But this was something from a little girl in Kingston who had Hodgkin's lymphoma or something, and I thought, we shouldn't fight alone. And I would tell students when I speak to them, hopefully if a new student comes to your school, they won't be alone. You will involve them. I heard on the America's Got Talent earlier in the year, a guy from Knoxville was singing. He had adopted some kids, and he said, it's difficult to pursue your dreams when you're busy trying to just survive. And I thought about this today. I thought about we have kids who are trying to survive. But your help, my help, all of our help, we're actually helping them to possibly be able to even dream. Because the work that's being done is great. Trail angels. My feet were bothering me. And I was struggling. I thought after 200-something miles, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. But I couldn't feel sorry for myself because I'm thinking about all these other people I'm hiking for. I can't quit. So I hitchhike into town. I'm walking to a shoe store. They don't have my size, so I walk on down. In a chance meeting, this couple who are driving a little Toyota Prius, they have 2 other people with them. Now think about that, a Toyota Prius, 4 people. They see me, they say, what are you doing here? I said, I'm looking for shoes. They were familiar with the trail. They had hiked it in the 80s. And they said, well, come here, get in our car. Now, I've not had a bath in 3 or 4 days. You know, I tell students, no underwear, no deodorant. So then they take me to the shoe store. They say, where are you staying? I said, I don't know. I don't see a hostel in this town because it's so far off the trail. They said, we know where a hostel is. And if there's no space for you, we'll take you home with us. Then they said, how are you getting back to the trail? I said, I don't know. Maybe. And most hostels would have a shuttle. Maybe they have a shuttle. What time do you want to leave in the morning? I said, what about 9 o'clock? They came and picked me up, took me to the post office, took me to the McDonald's for breakfast, took me to Walmart to resupply, and drove me over 20 miles back to the trail. See, these are trail angels. You are trail angels. You're just not on the trail. We all are trail angels. When I was asked about our legacy, what is our legacy? Is it going to be helping others? Are we putting water at a trail crossing for those who are struggling to find water? I told my brother told my mom I was actually chained off and couldn't fall. That's McAfee knob. You can see it's starting to get really smoky because of the fires as I'm getting closer to the south. This was in a church. I started taking pictures of churches in Maine, and I have a slideshow just for churches. Churches reach out to hikers. The Holston Conference actually sponsors a trail chaplain. Goodness is the only investment that never fails. And see, I think about, and this was one of the things that became so frustrating during the end of my career, we do a lot of good things a lot of times. But you know what? A lot of times when we do something good, we expect something in return. But when we truly help someone, that person really can't repay you. What you're doing now is truly helping someone because you're not expecting some big contract because of it. You're not expecting, and this was my experience, I saw people doing good so they could get their next promotion. They were interested in themselves. Now, I'm reaching the end of my presentation. But we've talked about trail angels. Silky Bear asked me, and we were walking, and he's mid-30s, long-legged. I'm running to keep up. What do you think it's about, Survivor? And I thought for a second, and I don't know if it's because I spent 32 years in education, or I think this way, and that's what led me to spend 32 years in education, but I answered his question, what do you think it's about, by saying, I think it's about helping others. So I'll go back to friends, trail angels, and others. And that's been my message nearly 50 times since I returned from the trail. I think God has used me. I think this was meant to be. But I'll ask you, what will your legacy be? What kind of trail angel are you going to be? What kind of friend are you going to be? And then I'll close by saying, how many of you recognize what that might be? And I'll ask you, and I've had one person answer this, that's a bathroom, maybe a little primitive, and you learn if the wind's blowing, don't sit your toilet paper down on the floor. Or you better be really quick. What does this bathroom lack that our bathrooms have? Running water. And I hear several answers, but the answer I'm looking for is a mirror. You know, one of the last things we do in the morning before we leave is probably look in the mirror and see how good we look. You know, I did. I might even ask somebody. Even at the presidential inauguration, I remember when President Trump was walking outside, they said, here's a mirror. Here's the last time the president will have a chance to look at himself before he goes in front of the people. Well, see, I disagree with that. And the reason I talk about this, I heard this on the trail. There are no mirrors in the woods. So, how do we know how we look? We know how we look by the reflections in the faces of those we interact with during the course of the hike or the day. So when we meet, now if I go over my allotted time, you're going to see someone not looking very good. But if we interact and she's smiling, what kind of reflection is that? If I'm thinking if she's smiling, then my reflection is actually good, isn't it? But now if we interact and I make her cry or sadden up, then my reflection is very poor. So I would think we should be more concerned about a reflection in those we interact with during the course of the day than that reflection we see in the mirror before we leave of the morning. Now, this is the picture I submitted for the program. Now, Susan, where's Susan? Susan said, I don't think I want to use that one. So Susan got on Facebook and found one more appropriate. But it goes back. When I go into Weigels back home, I interact with a whole different group of people when I'm dressed like this. But when I've got my mowing outfit on, I interact with a whole different group of people just based on how I look. But I'm the same person. So I would challenge you, don't let that deter you from stopping and talking to working class along the way. There might just be more to working class than what meets the eye. But this is December the 6th, Springer Mountain, Georgia, 158 days later. Now, my hike started, the second day was for Randy. And when I got to Davenport, the weather was getting really bad. I spent Thanksgiving in Hot Springs. Brian, my pastor, was going to come hike with me. But the weather was so bad, and Randy had taken a turn for the worse. Brian decided to come pick me up and take me to visit Randy instead of going on through the mountains. But Randy passed away on Saturday. And so instead of going back to visit Randy, I was a pallbearer in his funeral. And those are things that just kept happening that made me think about what's really important. So I would say, before the sun sets, think about your legacy, your friendship, and what kind of trail angel you're going to be. Thank you.
Steve, thank you so much for sharing such a great
This is one
message.
of the guys I met up there too.
Well, we just wanted to give you a small gift of our appreciation for coming and sharing your story today. And here's a clock.
Great.
And every time you look at it and think about the time, I hope you'll remember the time that you spent making a difference and the time that you shared with us today to make a difference as well.
Thank you
so much.
I appreciate it. Thank
You know, that is such an uplifting story of hope. You know, I don't know if you all have figured this out yet, but life gets hard sometimes, does it not? Would you agree with that? You know, we were talking and Wes was asking me about my family, and right now I've got a wife that's starting menopause, a daughter that's starting puberty, and a son that's starting college. And And I'm starting to think about drinking. So I would ask that you pray for me because it's hard at the Williams house. We go through storms, and right now I'm hunkered down in an estrogen tsunami. But we have challenges that face us, and I'm so thankful, Steve, that you're here on the other side of a challenge to remind us that we serve an awesome God who is bigger than the hardships we see, the challenges we face, and that's the message we get to tell at Holston Home. In all seriousness, when I think about some hardships, and we've all had those health issues with ourselves or someone we love, loss of loved ones, financial, all the things that can rain down on us, have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you just didn't belong? Where you just didn't matter? You were in the group, but you were, from your perspective, irrelevant. See, most of us may have not had that experience, or we've had it in really small doses in a certain situation. We were talking about travel baseball. About a little over 7 years ago, my son was invited to play on a team that was 2 years older and a whole lot better. And we went out and played, and for those of you familiar with travel baseball, you start on Saturday and then you go as far as you go on Sunday. And Saturday it was March and it was freezing, and my son had never seen a curveball, and we were playing in what they call the major division of 12-year-olds, and he was still 10. And this kid threw a curveball that he'd never seen before, and he bailed out. That Sunday morning, we played early. The coach pulled me aside and said, "I'm not going to play your son today. He looked scared." And in football, there's a lot of people on the sideline sitting out, right? If you're not playing, it's okay. You got a lot of friends. He was the only one on the bench at Knox Ballpark in Knoxville. And I sat there. Now, I knew he wasn't going to be the star, but I just felt like we didn't belong, that we were out of our league. And we played and we kept winning, so we got to sit there all day. He didn't play anything that whole day. And the awkwardness of other families speaking, even when they were nice, I felt like they just felt sorry for me. As the season went on, what happens, he did get to play, and he'd get a hit from time to time or make a good play. And when they would say something, I would say to myself, they're just feeling obligated. Now, I'm a pretty well-adjusted individual, and I kept telling myself, well, he's younger. Well, I tried to rationalize it, but I went home, and I felt an emptiness like I'd never felt in this. And I know that sounds silly, but for the first time I could kind of relate to what it must be like to be on the outside looking in and feeling like you're not like everybody else. Now again, small blip. In my almost 30 years of doing what we do at Holston Home, to me, that's the most debilitating thing that our kids face. Yes, they come from any number of situations that are hard, but I believe it's that feeling that they don't belong and that they're different and that good things in life aren't for them that are the hardest. And so our task, because we serve a God of hope, is to dispel that lie. We get to bring truth. Jesus said that the truth will set us free, and whom the Son sets free is free indeed. And that is the powerful message that we get to share. But we have to put it together. It can't just be words. We have to walk it out and live it out alongside of the kids that we serve. And so we do that through experiences. You've heard, many of you are familiar to me, and you've heard me talk that in May of each year we take a group of kids to Guatemala on a foreign mission trip. And we did that again this year. But we had, for the first time while we were there, we had one of our girls that we took who accepted Christ while she was down there. And that was so sweet. We were, we'd been doing vacation Bible school all day, and then we get back and we're having a time of devotion and worship, and she starts becoming emotional, and she starts talking with her counselor, and she said, kind of for the first time, it clicked that God loved her. Because she'd always wondered why her mother loved drugs more than her and why she couldn't be with her mom. And the only thing she could figure out was that she wasn't lovable. And to hear that, and to be able for the first time while she was there to minister, she heard the truth and heard it and experienced it in such a way that it has changed her life forever. And that is so cool. We look for opportunities everywhere where we get to speak truth into kids to say, you matter. You belong. You're like everyone else. And we do it. Education is a big way we do that. You can imagine our kids are oftentimes behind educationally. And so we are blessed to be able to have a private Christian on-campus school where we can do about a 6-to-1 student-teacher ratio, individualized work to help them get caught up and be successful academically. Because again, they believe they can't be. But I'm proud to share with you that in May we had our graduates, and we had 30 graduates this year across all the services that we provide, and 24 either went to college or have enrolled in college or a trade school starting this fall. That's 80%. That's good. And it's not because we instilled the ability. They had the ability. Hopefully, what God used us to do was instill the truth that they could do that. And so, and educationally, I could tell you about test scores and things like that, but, there's more to education than just getting a diploma. Sports is a big part of a lot of our past, and I was reminded as I was driving down this morning, we started a girls' basketball team at our school a few years ago, and I was thinking of Deb because she made a gift to help us buy uniforms and to get that off the ground. And one of our first ladies who played was a lady by the name of Sandra, and Sandra was good amongst our players, and so she has since gone into foster care, and she, I'll have you know, made the varsity basketball team at Greenville High School her freshman year, and they were regional champions last year. And so there's this great picture of her getting to help cut down the net in the local newspaper, and I just thought, man, how great is that we get to be an instrument that God uses to create those kind of experiences for kids. It's awesome. And a lot of what I do and that inspires me, because sometimes the work we do can be hard, but that's okay. Hard work never hurt anybody. But one of the things that keeps my battery so charged is I get to see how God weaves individually. Yes, I could tell you about the almost 700 kids that we serve, and I could give you facts and figures, but what's always moving to me is how God is intimately involved in each one of those lives of the almost 700. And I'll tell you a story that really illustrates this. We get a call about a month before school's out, and it was from a grandmother who was raising 3 of her grandchildren, and her daughter and husband were struggling with various addictions. There was a no-contact order for them to be around the grandchildren, and her husband had been diagnosed with cancer, and it was diagnosed as terminal cancer, and he was in the hospital, and she reached out. She's a good United Methodist lady, and she called because she'd always heard about the Holston Home for Children. Never thought she would need the Holston Home for Children. But she called, and she explained the situation, and she said, I need to be with my husband, but we can't take care of the 3 grandchildren, and right now the dad's not in jail, and he's watching them while I'm at the hospital, and that's violating a court order, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And so I'm on the phone. It was a Friday afternoon, and we're saying, you know what? Since this is a private referral, our foster homes are full. We stay full at Holston Home. I wish we could be working ourselves out of business, but we're not. And so I said, but since this is a private placement, I wonder if there are any staff that might be willing to take these kids in. And so we were sitting there and we were trying to think of some, and we couldn't think of any. And I try not to take work home because that's not healthy. But this particular time, they kept coming to my mind over the weekend. And on Monday morning, I was getting ready, and I thought, God, we've got to do something. I believe you led them to call us. Who can help with these grandchildren? And so then I was convinced that when I started asking who, and nobody's coming to mind, it might be me. And so I said, and I was praying as I was getting ready, and I was like, God, it would make absolutely no sense for us to do this, but is that what you're asking me to do? And then I said, and this is true, I'm not trying to be funny, but I guess it is kind of funny. I said, God, if it is, you're going to have to tell my wife. It's like, you're going to have, she will not listen to me on this, so you need to speak to her. We had her mother was having some health issues, son going off to college, all the other things I've already told you about. All that going on. I said, God, you're going to have to speak to her. And then I laughed and I said, God, who am I kidding? I've got a great wife. If that's what you want, then you've called me to be the spiritual leader of my household. I will tell her. And I said, but you need to speak to me and let me know. And I know God speaks to us in different ways, but a still small voice was like, Nick. And what you don't know, you met Abel earlier, but we've got a young man named Nick Cannon, and he's recently married, and he works in our Christian Life department with Abel. And I was like, Nick? And I was like, oh my goodness, that kind of makes some sense. Nick's wife is in between jobs. They're a great couple, but they got a small apartment. I don't know how this, and then I just stopped, and as I was driving into work, I called Nick. And I said, Nick, I'm not a prophet, and I told him what happened. And I said, now that's not a directive from the president of Holston Home for Children. And if God told me, then I feel sure he'll tell you if you pray about it. So don't take my word for it. You guys talk. But I really felt impressed upon that's what happened. And so Nick said, I'll pray about it. And I said, okay. Well, wouldn't you know, Nick talked to Brittany. They prayed about it. And so they started, it was towards the end of school, and so they had some other people, friends, to keep so the kids could stay in their school because they lived on the other side of Kingsport. But on weekends were where they needed help. And so Nick and Brittany brought these 3 into their home for the weekend. Well then, very last week of school, Steve as a principal can appreciate this, the oldest, Noah, had marijuana at school. And so they frown on that, no matter what school you go to. And so he was expelled. And so what that did was allow Nick to spend some more time with him. And because Nick is active on weekends, he stayed with the young man, and the other 2 were at school. And Nick got the opportunity to share the gospel with Noah. And Noah accepted Christ in Nick's home while his brother and sister were at school. And when they came home, he was like no brother they had ever seen. He was so happy. The burdens lifted. That weekend, Noah went down to the creek and Nick got to baptize Noah while his other brother Logan and his sister Sarah watched. Now Logan didn't know what was going on. He's the middle child and he wasn't much into the whole Christianity thing, but that didn't slow Noah down. And so as they had spent the weekend together, the younger sister, who was about 11, said, "I want what my brothers got." And so Nick and Noah got to share the gospel with Sarah, and Sarah made a public profession of faith, and Nick and Noah baptized Sarah. And I'm like, you can't write that. I mean, like, God had that in mind when that phone rang on that Friday afternoon, but we had no earthly idea what was unfolding. Now, I was talking to Nick about something else on the drive down, and he said, if you're going to tell that story, you tell him that Noah calls me about every day, and he's on fire for Jesus. So I said I would. So if you meet Nick, you tell him I said that. But they moved to Atlanta. The grandfather did pass away this summer, and the grandmother had some extended family in the Atlanta area, and so they moved down there. But Nick and Noah have a forever bond that God just worked out. You know, I tell stories instead of statistics because to me that gives more honor to God, because it shows Him at work. We just are fortunate to get front row seats. Sometimes the picture is hard to see hope. No matter how many times I hear stories like that, the fact of the matter is there's stories that don't end the way we would like for them to end. And so from time to time, there's that case that comes our way that I go, oh my gosh, I don't know. That's scary. That seems truly hopeless. And we had a story like that, and this will be the last one I kind of leave you with. A little boy who was 10 named Justin. Here's Justin. Justin's been adopted. I usually can't show pictures, so I was excited that I got to put a face with a story. But how Justin came to us, he was 10 years old. He weighed 35 pounds.
Oh, gosh.
He was found wearing nothing but a dirty diaper, strapped into a car seat under a bridge because his mother is seriously and chronically mentally ill. And the authorities found him. He was non-communicative, had multiple health issues, and so when he came to us, I must admit that one seemed really dark. And so the first thing you got to do is get him to the hospital, get the medical attention that he needs. And so we did that, and then we started looking for a foster home that would take on the challenges that a young man like this possessed. And the odds of finding one of those seems pretty slim. That is, unless you're Miss Harville. And so we found and talked to Miss Harville. We explained it. She went and visited him at the hospital and fell in love with Justin. She agreed when he was ready, he would come out of the hospital, he would live with her. And she took him into her home. And then our staff started working with him and the other professionals that were working with him and found out that though he couldn't speak, he could communicate with a tablet. And so we got him a tablet, and we found out he could communicate quite well. And he's funny. He cracks jokes on his tablet. And then we contacted the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and Justin went to Disneyland. Disney World, the one in Florida. And as things started progressing, the mom, and this is a rare kind of situation, realized she could never be what he needed. But because she saw her son loved and taken care of, she agreed to surrender her rights so that Juanita Harville could be his forever mother. And the next slide shows a picture that just a few days before this past Christmas, Miss Harville adopted Justin to join his adopted brother Connor. And if she was here right now, she wouldn't ask us to feel sorry for Justin or her or anybody else, because she thinks she's got the two best boys in the whole entire world. And I'm reminded time and time again, that's how God works, over and over. Now I close today with a final thought for you guys. I'm fascinated by processes. And I've always, you kind of wonder, even as a Christian, why doesn't God just, He's got infinite power, infinite resources. Why can't He just, boom, come down and just make the situation right? But I think about, kids. We let our kids help us do things, or feel like they're helping us do things. I was going to say, as a dad, I've done that, but I do that very poorly. Grandparents, you do that way better than parents. You're patient. You just let kids feel like they're really doing something to be a part of the solution. And I'm convinced that's why God gives us the opportunities to help. He could do it, but instead, He gives each of us resources, gifts, and opportunities to be able to get involved and make these kinds of things happen. You see, the trip to Guatemala, the private school that I told you about, being able to pay Nick and Brittany to take care of these kids, all that comes from donors' gifts. And so God just keeps putting people around our ministry that are willing to do their part to then give it to us. I feel like we're just, at Holston Home, we're just like the UPS guy. We just get to deliver God's package that was packed up and supplied by God's people, and we get to deliver it to the kids and watch all the fun. Sometimes I even feel guilty for that. But that's how the process works. Each fifth Sunday, you have an opportunity. When you plan your estate, you have an opportunity. And today, at this luncheon, you have an opportunity to get involved and let God use the blessings He's given you to pass it on and be the trail angel to any number of kids that we haven't even met yet. See, while we've been meeting, packages are being delivered at Holston Home where our staff are taking those resources and doing something with it. For those of you who've sponsored and given your gifts, thank you so much. Thank you for all of you who support us through the year on the letters you receive at Fifth Sunday. But as we close, and we're going to share a video with you, if you've not had a chance to make a gift and you feel led to do that, or if you have and you feel nudged to do something else, all I can say is thank you, and that you have my word. I'll do all that I can to ensure that it's used to glorify God and to help children. Let's pray. God, you truly have all the resources. You have all the answers. You have a plan for good for every kid at Holston Home now and the kids that will come. you ask us to join you. And God, I pray you know every person here. You know their abilities. You know what's before them. God, I don't want one gift more or one gift less than what you have planned, that they'll be blessed. God, I pray for our staff that we will be good messengers and good deliverers of your goodness and the love of people that are here today. God, I pray for every family that's here. I pray a blessing on them. I pray that you would just draw them close to you and just reveal yourself in new and fresh ways each day. God, we cannot get enough of you. We trust you completely. You have been a good and faithful Father. God, I just, in praising you and praying it, all of these prayers, in the wonderful name of Jesus. Amen.